preso dal delirio, non so più quel che dico e quel che faccio, eppure dopo forzati sei tu forse tu sei pagliaccio. La tuba era fatta marina, la gente paga e rider vuole qua. Se Arlecchino utir volo colombina, ridi pagliato e ognuno t'applaudirà. Tramonta il latti lo spasmo ed il pianto e non asmartia il singhiozzo e il dolor. Ridi pagliaccio sul tuo amore il freddo. Ridi del duol che t'avvelerà il cor.
And welcome back to Mr. Opera. And we're back with hints on singing by Manuel Garcia today. If you haven't read this book, I don't think you're really old school. So if you're into the old school singing and you're here from This is Opera, then welcome. We have chat set up today for you and also for people coming over from Mr. Opera who may be into new school singing or into old school singing or probably don't think it's all that important what you label things. But welcome. I'm happy you're here. I'm happy I'm here. I'm happy you're alive, and I'm happy I'm alive. So that's a really good thing. We've started looking at some tunes, watching some videos, listening to some music before we get into the homework, I guess, before we get into the study hour of actually reading the book. And that means we're taking longer to read the book, but also it means the live streams are way more interesting. So I got a great set of recommendations of stuff to look at from one of our viewers, Tiber, and he sent me a whole list of tracks that we can take a look at. And then he also was kind enough to send me some like notes about which timestamps we should be looking for and and what things he thought that he saw at these timestamps. So this is super awesome. We're going to start with an example of the tongue moving along exactly in sync with the vibrato, and then we'll talk about that for a second and what I think it might be. But if you have some idea about what you think it might be that causes this phenomenon, let's talk about it. So let's get to 6:05 in this thing. So I'm going to back up a little bit. This is from Verdi's Otello, by the way. If you don't know this duet, it's maybe one of the best duets of all time as far as opera duets and Verdi duets in general. But And it's a little bit unlike the Verdi duets that you're used to. If you're used to kind of chicka-da-lunk chunk, and then singing a cool tune. This is really different. But anyway, what we're looking at here is actually a technical thing. We're going to be looking for the tongue going in sync exactly with the vibrato. Let's get a better look here. Oh, I'm in the way. Yeah, that's terrible, guys. Sorry. Okay, let's move this over. Let's move the chats aside for a second. And it looks like I lost the This is Opera chat, but they don't seem to have much to say these days anyway. So, okay, I've moved myself over. And let's check out. This is, by the way, Alexandra Kurzak. Or I hope it's not Kurzak. I think it's Kurzak. Okay. Yeah, that's really, really clear that her tongue moves exactly in sync with the vibrato. Like, not where you'd think it's maybe incidental. It's too synced up, in my opinion, to the vibrato to be unrelated. And what I think is going on is that the diaphragm itself is involved, in this case, in creating the vibrato. And one of the ways, or the way that that's happening, is it's contracting and lowering the pressure as it does so that you get these changes in pressure, and those changes in pressure make a change in pitch. And if that change in pressure is regular and oscillating, you get this vibrato. But when that happens, it's possible for the trachea itself, that's the you have a esophagus, and that's the pipe that food goes down, and then trachea is for air. So your windpipe, if you know that word. The trachea itself is attached to a line of what's called fascia. Fascia is like, it's not tendon or ligament, it's not muscle, it's not skin, it's not bone, it's like this tissue that you have. And it doesn't contract or anything like that, it's passive. But there's a bunch of this fascia bundled up, and it goes from your diaphragm. I'm pointing at my diaphragm, but obviously you can't see that right now. Anyway, it goes from your diaphragm up just one side of your body, the side where your heart is, for almost everyone that's on the left, but actually, believe it or not, some people are backwards. When it gets to your heart, so when it gets to your heart, this fascia blends into the stuff that's around your heart. I think it's a muscle. Anyway, that's called the pericardium. And then it turns into fascia again, keeps going, and gets to your trachea. And it's possible to pull the trachea down using this fascia, essentially by contracting the diaphragm. So what I think is going on is that the reason we see the tongue move is that the tongue at its base is connected to the hyoid bone. And the hyoid bone sits on top of the larynx, and that's attached to the trachea. So that whenever you're pulling down on the trachea, if nothing is holding the hyoid still, you're going to get this shaking, or if nothing is holding the tongue still, you'll get this shaking of the tongue, because at its root, in the back, is this hyoid bone. So you're shaking the bone that the tongue is actually tied to. And that's what I think causes that. If you think something else causes it, let me know what you think. And I'm just going to real quick check that my chats are working, because these YouTube live chats can be a little bit glitchy. But it looks like we're good. And I'm going to write 2. No, we're good. And I've got the PDF listed there that we're going to be reading today. So in case you want to read that. And while I'm here, I should mention that it's really helpful when one of you sends some suggestions of videos that you'd like to watch together like this. So thank you very much to Bear, and thank you to others who have sent stuff. I've got this cool set of voice lessons that Miloki has given, and I'm gonna try to see if I can play around with the sound on that so we can figure out what Miloki was actually saying. So that stuff's really helpful, and I think for you guys it's a lot cooler than me sitting here pontificating about Garcia. Please send these in, and we'll be able to review them like this. So next up is... Oh, I'm sorry. I went too far here. So next up is going to be the famous Bonisoli. And Tiber noticed something else interesting here. It wasn't tongue vibrato, but he noticed the jaw getting involved in the vibrato. And I guess before we watch it, since we're talking about the same topic essentially, this also makes sense possibly as having tracheal tugging involved, because your hyoid bone is also attached to some of the muscles in your jaw. So the mylohyoid muscle, which is one of the muscles you use for really opening your jaw, and the digastric is also used for extreme jaw opening. Those are attached to the jaw or to the chin, and conceivably, if you were pulling the hyoid down at some kind of rhythm, and that rhythm were exactly what we're hearing in terms of the vibrato, then it would make sense for the tongue vibrato to match, or for the movement of the jaw to exactly match the variation in the pitch that is our vibrato. So let's check that out. Let's check out Bonisoli. I'm gonna find the timestamp here. Tiber tells us to look at 2:08. So let's get to 2:08. What am I looking at here? Okay. Some weirdness. I see what's going on. Okay. Sorry, guys. Let's find Bonisoli again. As you can see, we got a bunch of videos to get through. I don't know if we'll get through all of them, but okay. So we need 2:08. Let's get to 2:08. And I guess I'll make the screen bigger so we can see what's going on here. I'll start at 2. It's a little quiet. Oh yeah. And we're not talking about a huge movement, but that would be, that would make sense for what it is that we're talking about, like how much movement we're talking about. And it makes a lot of sense also for the jaw to be moving a little bit less than the tongue would. I've also seen both of them moving together, but it's interesting that we didn't in this case. We saw one moving but not the other. And I think that would have to do with what's being stabilized and what isn't stabilized. And I know it's a bad word, and we're not supposed to talk about tension. But whether it's good or bad, the stabilizing that you would need in order to prevent this from happening would be tension. And also what's making the movement in the first place is a kind of tension. So when I say the word tension, I'm not saying I'm not saying tension. I'm not saying something bad necessarily. Everything good and everything bad pretty much is going to be tension. Because if it's not tension, nothing happened in your body. So that's a really interesting example. Now let's look at what Tiber had queued up next. This is like really helpful. Tiber, you did my live stream for me basically here. Okay, now you're gonna make me work because this is gonna be a three tenors concert with one of my favorite modern tenors, which is Mrula, and I'm not so familiar with these other two, but we're gonna have some differences in density and metal for sure, because I did listen a little bit. So we're gonna watch it. We're gonna have to watch it from this perspective with the small screen here because, YouTube and copyright and blah blah blah. So let's hear a little bit of this. A little bit quiet. Nice low notes. So here we have kind of our standard metallic fuller density sound. That this is the sound, a lot of tenors, when they're students, I guess, they figure, if only I could just get these high notes. And then you get the high notes kind of worked out. And then you try to sing this aria. And you lose the audience on the second phrase. Because if you can't pump out the second phrase, none of it has any point. There's no point that you sang the end high or whatever, because they didn't come to hear Ferrando, singing Nessun Dorma. Well, I mean they could have, but it really messes with the characterization. I think when the low notes are weak. So I mean, really amazing, really cool. And let's see, yeah. Well, that was an interesting, if you watch how his head, shall we say, his head rotation is pretty interesting. He's more of he's keeping the chin closer to the chest. But if you take a look at how he's doing it, he's super pro about it. So it doesn't have this kind of look where, he doesn't look like he's looking at the floor. But if you compare to the position his chin is in right now, in this position, if you hit him in the chin, you would knock him out without hitting him so heavy. You wouldn't have to hit him so hard. If we look at where he is when he starts singing, watch his chin. So you wouldn't knock him out as easily with his chin in this position. And then he seems to avoid overdoing it with opening up with his whole neck, so he's not winding up with his chin pushed forward. So in terms of Garcia, that exercise with the paper tied around the chin, around the neck, like a strip of paper that goes around your neck and chin, and you're supposed to keep from breaking the paper. He's acing that. He's doing that perfectly. Yeah. Some schools of singing call that neck anchoring. You can call it retraction, protraction, whatever, but I think there's also some very special care given to the angle of the head. And then when he wants to open his mouth more, he winds up having to rotate the whole head to make a vowel. And so it's a cool thing. I mentioned the Pez dispenser or South Park Canadians. He's doing that sometimes. Right there. That's great. Okay. And now we're in reduced density. So you can hear how different it is. Maybe slightly... I don't think it's metallic. I might be there to bear. Maybe we can go. Okay. Oh, really? Really interesting. Obviously, really different sound. But we can't. We can hardly compare it to the other two so far because of the range. So this is below the range where you're coupling the second formant to the third harmonic. So compared to the other guy, we have no metal. If there's any, I don't think there's any metal in the sound. So more of a neutral sound, and then also the density is not so much, which means that the vocal folds would be allowed to stretch more in order to get the tension in the vocal folds. The other way to get tension in the vocal folds, well, actually, you can do something in between, but the vocal folds being like sort of like rubber band kind of material, not really, but they have this elasticity. So when you stretch them out, there's this tension. Well, I guess okay, this way. So there's this tension just from stretching it, just like a rubber band would have tension. But if you imagine now the rubber band has muscles built into it, and you can do another thing where you try to stretch so you put tension on the rubber band, but as you put tension, you also decrease the elasticity. So you make it less elastic. You tense it up on its own, basically. It's not on its own because you need something pulling to get that done, right? And then you increase the pressure more than you would have. And that gets you the same pitch because it can get you the same frequency. But the vocal folds are not the same length. And I'm not talking about the inherent or like natural length of the vocal folds. Every person is capable of singing with more or less density, at least theoretically. You might struggle. It might be hard. And for instance, your vocal folds might not be, the ligament maybe is too stretchy, or the muscle, maybe the thyroarytenoid muscle isn't strong enough to do what you're trying to do. That's different from it's impossible, period. It just means you can't do it yet. It's like saying, yeah, it is possible to deadlift 300 kilograms. You know, that doesn't mean you can do it. So, yeah. Onwards. This is metallic. And I guess on the more fuller side of density. Staying with it, yeah. So it's not so complicated. He sings in a very simple style. And that is what happened. Why do I have Caruso in the background here now? Be quiet, Caruso. Okay. Now we have to go back. He also uses And we can't compare because of the range. And we're also kind of zoomed out, which is annoying. But I think he uses less of the chin tucking. I'm not going to say tucking's the wrong word. Who's singing? Is this the reduced density guy from before? I don't know. Who are these names? If someone could put the names, so kind. Because I only know Murle. Okay, yeah. So this sound gets significantly louder in a higher register. But I think, as you heard before, it's a little bit out of place in the lower register. Oh, no. Okay, we're still in this register. I think he's just trying to beef it up a bit. No, that's neutral. So I think we had like curbing and neutral. So a reduced density, but metallic, like a half metallic sound. But it would be really, if we have a CVT person here, that would be great. They're almost infallible at this, but yeah. But it's not this fuller density sound in edge and overdrive. Now who's next? I bet you Miller's next. He was preparing his jaw there. Nope. Okay, so he's at the top, not taking up the metallic sound, which is still, it's I think a reduced metallic sound from Müller, but it seems like he's reducing quite a bit now, so that the approach compared to Müller is very different. Let's see. I could probably make this big. I think the metal is just reduced quite a bit. But it's the range in which you're coupling formants to harmonics. This is interesting. I expected... I didn't really expect this sound from him. He much more rounds things out or covers them, shall we? So from Garcia perspective, he might say that this is the winner. Garcia might be like, this is the best of the three. But he might also like the reduced density guy more, and he might be saying, why are these other two guys yelling? Why are they screaming? It's uncouth. They're just showing off their teeth. That's okay. Look at this, the size of the mouth already. Now if we go back, it's interesting. It's not like this guy's singing with a small mouth, right? But the amount of space that he could make is more than this. With the jaw. Especially with the jaw. That's neutral. Okay. Now we see some really different positions, don't we? So we've got our lighter tenor with the reduced density guy has a little bit of a protracted head, a little protracted neck, our middle guy is in a pretty standard shape, but look at the way the mouth opening is actually smaller. So he's tending to favor, here we see it again, slightly smaller mouth shapes. He's got this, it's hard to see from here, but Pavarotti was really famous for this thing. And that's a great technique. It does come out slightly lighter than what Murillo is doing there on the end. So it's really cool. Really cool to have all three of these and look at the different. You can just go frame by frame. Yeah, great stuff. So, really interesting variety. It would have been nice to hear. I would like to hear everyone sing the whole thing, basically, and then compare. But especially this first phrase, to me, is kind of like a crazy test of, I don't know, something. Let's see what's up in the chat. Okay, so not much up in the chat. Let's move on to the next. Now we have. Okay, just make sure Caruso is staying quiet when I hit stop here. So, I wonder if we should go. Maybe we should go on to Garcia. If nobody has any questions about anything so far, I could save the rest for another day. Let's see. Let's talk about some Garcia a bit, and then let's come back to this if people want to hear more music, and then maybe I'll just also keep it a little bit shorter today, and we can look at more next time. That's kind of the fun thing about these live streams is, like, who cares if you didn't cover everything you needed to? You know, you can do it next time. Okay. So I'm going to take my chats away here for a second. And I'll at least pull up a doc with my Mr. Opera chat here. Kind of dead. It's a Sunday. Okay. So where were we? I think we were talking about vocal faults, etc., etc. 4 and 5 was there. Okay. Fatigue. We're talking about fatigue of the vocal organs today. That's going to be an interesting topic because fatigue of the vocal organs is like it's like, you'd think it's like cancer or something, because a lot of voice teachers and pedagogues and stuff treat it like it's, I don't know, like much more dangerous than it is. But I did get a little bit yelled at by a good colleague and friend who said, you know, actually the soprano singing is kind of dangerous, and that's true. So I should probably keep that in mind, I guess, when I say that all of the fears people have that we're about to read about are way overblown, and that voice teachers tend to have a really good incentive for exaggerating the dangers, because because of this technique that they're doing where they set up something scary and then they set themselves up as the thing that protects you from something scary. You know, you're either being saved, like your teacher's the messiah of singing, and you're in a crisis, or they're protecting you from damage, and sometimes when there is no crisis and there is no danger, they will just invent the danger. But it is true, as far as I know, that young women in particular have a much higher risk of vocal injury and vocal problems that could be permanent or last a long time, and that would affect function. And that's true if it's especially true if you're a kindergarten teacher. But if you're a nurse or a teacher or a politician, well, no, politician is really tough on the voice. But if you're any job description and you're a female human in early 20s, then you have a much higher risk than me for any kind of vocal injury. To Bear, you're asking who yelled. No, I think that Garcia would characterize maybe everyone but the lightest of those three tenors as perhaps yelling, based on the things that Garcia is recommending so far, which are, I'm gonna put up the question there. So To Bear was asking who yelled. And I think that nobody yelled, but Garcia was super conservative. So, and well, it's not just conservative. Like, he has his fixed ideas about, like, you should never show your teeth, and basically these everyone but the guy on the left. I don't know their names. I don't care. Who yelled about soprano singing? I don't know. You have to remember, I don't know. I was saying that some minutes ago, and now I'm on to a different train of thought. So if you can remind me what I said, I'm not following like that. Because I'm also, I'm running this OBS studio here, and I have to do all these scenes while I'm doing it. So there's always like 5 things that I'm doing as I talk to you, and it's really easy to lose my train of thought. But it's just like something like that. I'm not going to hang on to it. So if you could type out the whole thing, that would be great. I should maybe somehow open up like lines for people to call. Anyway, so I'm gonna read on. Maybe I'll remember what I was saying about someone yelling about soprano singing. Okay. 15. And now we are officially reading Garcia. So we don't need that. But let's get rid of the chats, and yeah, let's bring the book on. By the way, if you're following along, the book is available free, and there's a link. It's the pinned comment in the chat. And I don't make any money from you downloading that, so don't think that, like if you're on This Is Opera and you don't like Mr. Opera, don't worry, you can safely download that thing, and it's not going to help me. But it might help you to actually read the old school books that you keep saying are so important. Anyway, so Section 15. Fatigue of the vocal organs. To what would you ascribe the fatigue of the vocal organs? Besides the different ailments of the vocal organs which concern the physician, colds, swollen tonsils, elongated uvula, tumors, polypus, anemia, etc., there are other causes, such as misdirected study or overwork. The practice of singing 3 or 4 hours a day will ruin the most robust organ. 3 half hours a day at long intervals ought to be the maximum of study and should give flexibility without risk of fatigue. Yet, if this should cause the least appearance of lassitude or uneasiness, it must be reduced or stopped at once. Make myself bigger here. Are there any other symptoms? Hoarseness, relaxed throat, languor of the organ, which refuses to execute passages generally possible, dryness or heat in the throat, difficulty in swallowing, fatigue after a few minutes' exercise. All these symptoms may quickly disappear after a little rest, with good, simple, substantial nourishment. Should they persist, a doctor must be consulted. Will not the voice lose its quality through interrupting study? The cessation of work for days or even for weeks will not occasion the loss of past study. On the contrary, after an enforced rest, when work is resumed, actual progress seems to have been made. To insist on singing while the voice is suffering may produce the worst results. Has the study of the piano any influence on the voice? A bad one, if it is prolonged 4 or 5 hours a day. This, continued through the period of growth, keeps the vocal organ in a constant agitation, which, though quite imperceptible to the executant, weakens and exhausts the vocal instrument. Has ordinary speech any effect on the voice? Singers should be chary of their voices, speak little, and not read aloud. A clergyman's sore throat is a well-known result of the latter exercise. Oh shit. Silence is golden should be the singer's device. What is the use of transposition to singers? To spare the most delicate and precious qualities of their voices, the velvetiness and the freshness. It was invented for singers and ought to be used without scruple. If a piece should not be fitted for transposition and would be disfigured by alterations, it would be better not to sing it than risk forcing the voice. The violent efforts required by a single air might be, and have been, enough to ruin a career. What precautions should a singer take against climatic influences? He should avoid sudden changes of temperature, never sing in the open air, and when passing from a warm to a cold temperature, especially after singing, he should protect his mouth and breathe through the nose. In a word, if he desire to attain fame and secure wealth, every one of his acts must tend to promote the healthy duration of his organ. Chi dura vince. He who lasts will conquer. Have you no observations to make on food and clothing? It is hardly necessary to remind the student that without nutritious diet and warm clothing, the voice will not endure. So, super interesting chapter. We have a note from Herman Klein. Notes of warning are constantly being sounded in the course of this work. All must be sedulously heeded, but none more than those which appear in this and the succeeding chapters. For every defect of method or fault of style, a remedy is provided, nor can its value be overestimated. It is clear, however, that the author regards prevention as infinitely more vital to the student than questions of cure. The latter is never absolutely certain, whereas by avoiding mistakes at the outset and eschewing excesses of every kind, the singer need never apprehend serious trouble, and it is in a far better position to accomplish the labor essential for becoming a true artist. Note, Herman Klein. Oh, Herman. Oh, Herman. So, Herman sure loves this chapter, because I bet you Herman was making a career, especially out of leveraging his fame as a Garcia guy to protect people from vocal damage. And like I was saying earlier, I shouldn't laugh so much when it comes to the sopranos. But when it comes to the tenors, the danger is not, the singer is not in danger, especially with a young beginning tenor. It's the audience that's in danger. That's, you could never recover possibly from hearing someone. No, I'm just kidding. It's like, but it is though. It's like hearing someone learning the oboe. Like, what could be worse? I mean, but that's part of the trouble of becoming a tenor in the first place, you know, is that it's so awkward at the beginning. And a lot of the easiest solutions to the awkwardness that might actually still produce the music are not the ones you're going to eventually want to be using. But then, like, what do you use until then? So it's this whole, what do you do? So you never sing, or you only sing like 3 pitches or something? And no, but luckily, Garcia is wrong a lot of times in his assumption that whatever it is you do with your voice, it's going to cause it to become or to grow in a certain way that's going to make it specialized. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Because, for instance, let's say you really work on your flexibility and you're able to stretch further, but you also work on strength, then you're not losing any strength because you became flexible. You know, if you look at gymnasts, or even a lot of bodybuilders, they're extremely flexible and extremely strong. Those go together. They don't, you know. It is also true, I think, that you can be hypermobile and suffer from too much flexibility and not enough strength. I could tell you from experience. So yeah. But let's get to this first question. So, colds and tonsils, okay. Yeah, I don't know what elongated uvula is. That's pretty interesting, though. I don't know what polypus is. It sounds like a platypus. Sounds like a kind of cool animal. But so anemia, we don't have so much of that anymore, but you can get anemia. And so basically any kind of physical fitness issue is going to affect your voice. And in musical singing, that's the whole, you know, fitness category. So yeah, that's that. And then overwork would be vocal overuse, and that's, I think, as far as we know, like that's the number one thing. Absolutely number one. No matter how good your technique is, etc., etc., there's some point at which it's like that's too many total hours. That's too much total time of working, and you're not going to recover. Yeah. Make sure my microphone is working and everything. Yeah, okay. So the practice of singing 3 or 4 hours a day will ruin the most robust organ. Well, I would say, I guess at the student level, yeah. Later on, you're doing that for rehearsals. You may not be singing full out the whole time, but for instance, if your choices are sing the phrase in fuller density with a metallic sound, or sing it in falsetto neutral, so marking, and yet still try to be loud enough that the pianist or the conductor or your colleagues can hear you, so that they can at least follow and put the thing together with you. That might be much easier for a soprano to go from the full soprano sound, which is still this falsetto neutral mode, to just a really quiet version of the same vocal mode. Definitely they are then not taxing their vocal folds as much. That makes a lot of sense. But oftentimes I've been marking, so singing in a really quiet kind of falsetto voice, and at the end of that, at the end of the scene or at the end of a rehearsal, I'm more tired than I would have been. At least my vocal folds are more tired than they would have been if I had just sung the thing normally, if I just sang it out. And the reason for that isn't that falsetto is harmful. It's trying to get the sound anyway that's harmful. And you can tell yourself all you want, no, don't sing louder. Only stick to this minimum amount of sound that you decided to do. And you try to discipline yourself. But if you're any kind of colleague or any kind of actor or any kind of musician, you're gonna wind up pumping out a little bit more sound because you're looking to communicate. And that's gonna be destructive. So yeah, so interesting thing there. So he's saying that singing 3 times a day for half an hour is his maximum. And that's not so if you're a university student, for instance, and you're putting in an hour and a half a day in this way, and you're doing productive things, that's a lot of practicing, actually, especially if that's just technical practice. But as in singing, you can take care of a couple things at once. So you can make technical practice out of a piece that you're learning, and by the time you've done all the technique stuff, you've basically memorized the piece. So, but still, an hour and a half would be, I think, much more than what most university level singers are doing. So it's not unreasonable what he's saying here. It's pretty good advice. Interesting that he says that should give flexibility without risk of fatigue. I'm not sure what he means. He doesn't really define flexibility. It's the ability to change pitches really quickly, or to change registers or what. It's not defined. So this list of symptoms is really interesting. So hoarseness, we all know. Relaxed throat. So I don't know what that. So, what is that? I'd love to. I wish he were here so we could ask him, what is relaxed throat? I think it might mean when you've been singing for a while and your voice is now set low. But maybe not. I don't know. Because generally, I'm happy when that happens. But I'm not trying to sing the way Garcia told me to. But when I feel, if I finish a scene and my low notes have gotten stronger, then I'm like, this is going to be a really good night. Because it means I'm not having trouble getting from the top back down to the bottom without I'm not having trouble hanging on to my density and bringing a lot of metal into the low register. And that means I don't have a very high risk of the kind of fatigue he's talking about. Because when the low range is coming really easy, you don't have to work so hard to try to pump it out. And working hard to pump out the sound when you're not in a great vocal coordination is how you make it even worse. So it's like a snowball effect that hits you if you start to lose the low range. Of course, it's not true if the tessitura of the piece is really high. And then you start to see why certain tenors favor higher tessitura, and they tend to be lighter singers because they're stretching out the vocal folds more. So that could be the flexibility he's talking about. But I'm not sure. The way I think of time when I think of singing is I think in sleeps. So 10 sleeps is 10 units. If you work on whatever, then it's not necessary to put in any particular amount of time per day. If you're starting to feel frustrated, work a little bit more than that, and that's it. After that, what you need to do is sleep. And frustration plus sleep, it means that the next day you probably have some new idea or some new, you'll be closer to a new coordination if you felt that frustration. So that's how I would schedule time. Frustration and sleep. That's and by the way, lassitude. What's lassitude? Is lassitude being lazy, or is it being cowardly? I'm gonna have to look this up. What does the word lassitude mean? Lassitude means, okay, it's tired. A state of physical or mental weariness, lack of energy. So he's just saying, any kind of symptoms of stress, then you want to pull back on how much you're doing. Reduce the volume. In modern training terms, they talk about volume and intensity in like weightlifting or sports. And that's probably a good way to translate what he's saying. If you start to get symptoms or signs of overtraining, then pull back on the amount of training that you're doing. I would say maybe add to that, pull back more than you think you need to. Because if you got into a cycle of overtraining, it's not going to be I don't think it's that easy to get out of it. But also you probably aren't in that kind of situation. Like where that situation comes up is with like where I've seen it is with some super obsessed people who they're not really practicing. They're more like compulsively singing, and it's different. Yeah, so that's that. Are there any other symptoms? We saw. Okay, no, we have more of these ones. Okay, hoarseness, relaxed throat, languor of the organ. And languor, again, I think that's more laziness. Let's see. Languor. Let's get a precise definition here. Languor. So languorous is characterized by tiredness or inactivity. So this is just the same. This is the same as lassitude. I think this is like they're pulling out the thesaurus. It's like, oh, we said lassitude last time. What are we going to say this time? So if the voice becomes lazy and refuses to execute passages generally possible, that would be the sign of overtraining, I think. That you've started to have trouble doing stuff that doesn't typically give you trouble. Dryness or heat in the throat, I don't buy it. I mean, that's probably just allergies. Or, he doesn't know about acid reflux and stuff. And hormones, and yeah, there's a lot of factors he couldn't have been aware of that are going to affect the voice. And he doesn't mention emotions here. So dryness or heat in the throat, difficulty in swallowing, yeah, for sure. I've never seen anyone get difficulty in swallowing from vocal practice, though. I think he's just throwing in symptoms to, because why not throw in more to be afraid of? Fatigue after a few minutes exercise. That's a real one. That's a sign of overtraining, I think. All these symptoms may quickly disappear after a little rest with good, simple, substantial nourishment. So, you Sopranos, you gotta eat something. Should they persist, a doctor must be consulted. And while we're here, yeah, I think, let's see, any talk about vocal health for singers ought to always include a mention about any mention of vocal health for singers or any kind of coverage of medical issues or vocal health issues for singing ought to always include a reminder to singers that non-steroidal anti-inflammatories or any kind of blood-thinning medication might make you feel like a badass while you're singing and really reduce your symptoms and seem like it's healthy. But that's a really, really good way to increase your risk of vocal hemorrhage by like 1,000% or 10,000% or whatever. It's a lot. So if you have inflammation, the biggest one to avoid is aspirin. Aspirin can totally just destroy your voice. And if you're a vocalist, you might even think about that if you have a cough and you're considering aspirin. If you have a cough and a fever or something and you're considering aspirin, consider a different medication or consider going to the doctor, because your risk of hemorrhage is so much higher when you take aspirin. Ibuprofen is also non-steroidal anti-inflammatory and quite not as dangerous as aspirin, but it's pretty dangerous. So if you have these kinds of symptoms and you're gonna be using your voice, or maybe even if you're not using your voice, but you have some kind of cough, then consider just paracetamol or Tylenol, as you call it in the United States. And that's a pretty big deal. So I should mention that because we're talking about vocal health. Garcia didn't have non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. They had like milk of the poppy or whatever. So not a problem for him. But so has the study, and this is a fun section. Okay. Will not the voice lose its quality through interrupting study? So he says that not singing for days or even weeks is not going to cause you to forget how to sing. That makes a lot of sense. I don't think it will. And also, on the contrary, after an enforced rest, when work is resumed, actual progress seems to have been made. I have noticed this, and I have no explanation for why this is the way it is, but it is. To insist on singing while the voice is suffering may produce the worst results. So in new school singing, you have this concept called switching. And switching is kind of like a fancy thing. It's like fancy procrastination or something. It's clearly someone with ADHD thought of this system. Switching is... I'll give an example. If you've been working on your knowledge and you're learning a million things about singing, maybe when you started working on your knowledge about singing, you noticed that actually it gave you benefits in your singing. You learned some things and actually you were able to apply them. But maybe after a while, you started knowing a lot more about singing than you know any singing. So you're not improving your singing, but you're definitely improving like how well you can comment on someone else's singing on a YouTube video, something like that. If you want to start making progress again, one way you could try to get out of this loop that you've been going in, you're going in circles, I call it a loop, is you switch to something else. It doesn't have to be switching from, let's say, working on your knowledge to working on your fitness, or working on your knowledge to working on your psychology, on your heart, like whether or not you actually have the heart to perform or even to practice. But that is a kind of switch that you could think of. And when you see this triangle symbol in new school singing, or you might see like a pyramid shape with 3 sides, that is supposed to represent being able to look at the same problem just from different angles. So if you look at the knowledge of singing, it actually has everything in it that you would need. It's just that you get a much better sense of singing if you're not only trying to learn about it from that perspective. It's theoretically possible to completely understand singing or whatever just by knowing everything there is to know, but it's practically impossible to do it that way. So this enforced rest that he's talking about could be thought of as, okay, I'm not going to do anything that has to do with my singing. But you could also say, actually, my whole life is about getting good at singing. And if that means sometimes I'm going to be doing a lot of actual vocalizing, and other times I'm going to be doing something else to build some kind of capability that I want to use in my actual singing, then you do that. And having a plan to do that, not too often, but not waiting so long that you're in a loop and now you're, I don't know, maybe like starting a whole YouTube channel making fun of your singer colleagues because you're frustrated about your progress. So you could skip all of that and instead do this switching thing. And that's how I think we can actually take Garcia's advice, because what he says is true, really true here, that often after not singing for some time, for some reason you made progress when you start again. And it's a mystery. And it's true, I think, but it's really hard advice to take. It's hard to convince yourself to do it. But if you tell yourself that you actually are working on your singing, just in a different way, from a different angle, then maybe you can. So yeah, and now this is nuts. Okay, the piano part. Has the study of the piano any influence on the voice? Now, I don't play the piano, so maybe this is true, but it just seems, I don't know, it seems far-fetched. That if you're doing long hours of practice, so which he calls 4 or 5 hours a day, I think modern pianists would call that light practicing, but I'm not sure. As far as I think they play like 8 hours a day or something. Definitely in a rehearsal, they're going to be playing 4 or 5 hours a day. So he says that for some reason, playing the piano keeps the vocal organ in a constant agitation. I don't know what he means. Like maybe you're singing along. I don't know, like Glenn Gould. There's this pianist called Glenn Gould, and he was always singing along with the music. Let me check the chats if anyone has maybe someone has a theory about this, if someone's in the chats. Anyone there? Okay. Oh yeah, I guess you're talking about the piano. Yeah, but Tibert, people are sitting all day watching YouTube now, so if the piano is gonna I mean, he's talking about 4 or 5 hours a day. I mean I can crank out 4 or 5 hours trying to get these friggin' chat bubbles to work. I still don't have chat bubbles. But yeah, he puts it down to constant agitation, which makes it sound like you're somehow like subconsciously humming along or something. I don't get it. The part about the sitting, maybe internally rotated shoulders, or I don't know. That I get it, that the position might not be great. And I get it that if you want to be a specialist, if you want to be like a top singer, maybe you can't also be a top pianist. But I know tons of singers who can play okay, I think I agree with him, but for me it's not a constant agitation of the vocal organ thing. It's more like there's so many hours in a day, and when are you doing your singing, and when are you thinking about your singing if you're playing the piano all day? I don't know. My conclusion with this is anyone who's saying that I don't have to play the piano is my friend. It's like the enemy of my enemy is my friend. So, oh, I didn't mean to bring that back. I meant to take that away. Okay. So has ordinary speech any effect on the voice? And Garcia tells us that singers should be chary of their voices. I guess that means careful. speak very... I have to know what cherry. And how do you pronounce cherry? Let's see. Cherry. What is the meaning? Cherry. Cautiously or suspiciously reluctant to do something. Oh! This is, all the, when This Is Opera was really huge, they were always really careful not to sing, to make sure that nobody heard them sing. And it must have been because they were reading Garcia. They were being cherry with their voices. That explains everything. That is a commitment to the old school, I'll tell you. So that's that. Yeah, has ordinary speech, and yeah. So he recommends that they speak little and not read aloud. Oh, fuck. I mean, oh jeez. I can't say that in the live stream. So I didn't mean to say. I was speaking French suddenly and referring to a seal. And I used the French word for a seal. So if the algorithm or whatever, if the YouTube gods could please forgive me, it's because I'm bilingual. And if you don't agree, you're a racist. Okay. So he's recommending that they should speak very little and not read aloud. I understand this advice. And I would go as far as to recommend that the more you can sing without looking at a score, the better. So you should consider the period in which you are looking at your score and singing as preliminary. Like you're not really singing. I mean, you are, but you're reading and singing. You're kind of multitasking. And maybe it affects some people more than others. But I cannot, for instance, sing reasonably well in an oratorio if I actually read the score that I'm holding. I'm holding the score just for tradition, just to be polite. But it does nothing except take away from the performance, having this thing to hold. And there's something about the attitude and mindset of reading that is kind of the opposite of performing. At the same time, I think that's probably a skill you could work on if the important thing for you is being able to sight read and being able to, or if you're working on your voice specifically because you want to be good at reading things aloud, there's no reason why you couldn't get good at that. And there's no reason why with opera, the issue is that you're not trying to get good at that. You're not trying to get good at singing off of a score. You're trying to get good at singing and acting and being able to communicate to the audience and see what's going on around you, respond, etc., etc. And then I would add to this that following the conductor can have the same effect on you as reading something, and the same effect on your voice. I don't think it's magic. I think it has to do with the way your brain tells your rib cage and your spine and your pelvis and everything which way is up and which way is down and how you're going to stay balanced. And how that system, that's mostly based on visual cues, interacts with your middle ear. It's actually measuring gravity. And having a different line of sight has a big effect on any kind of difficult task that requires a lot of coordination of the whole body, like lifting weights. So weightlifters are obsessed with their sight lines. If you go to a serious Olympic weightlifting gym, or even a powerlifting gym or something like that, you will be expected to know that if someone is trying to execute a lift, or like not even necessarily a really big lift, any kind of lift, you don't walk in front of their sight lines. Because they're trying to fix their gaze on a particular place on the floor, and they need a clean line of sight to that, because it's an important way their brain is communicating with their body to actually pull off the lift. And slight changes to that have big effects as you increase the difficulty of what you're trying to do. And I think this is a big deal that he's noticed, that when you're reading something and trying to use your voice at the same time, it's very difficult. I'm getting a little bit better at it in these live streams, but you may notice that sometimes I'm reading to you, or I'm following something on the screen and talking to you at the same time, and my voice gets really weak. And especially, I'll start my head wants to go towards the text, for instance, because if I'm like this, it's slightly more difficult to read compared to if I'm like this. I'm like a little bit closer. But this has a really big effect on my voice. And when I try to make a lot more sound like this, now this is costing me a lot. But if I wanted to be like this close to the screen and not with my neck protracted, I have to work pretty hard with the rest of my body. And it's not necessarily, worth it, I guess. It's not my primary objective to have perfect vocal production as I read this to you. If it were, my first step ought to always be memorizing the text. So, yeah, I have a big agreement with Garcia on this part. Some people think I'm a little crazy because I agree with him so much. But yeah, and if you see me in a performance, you may notice that there's no glasses on my face, and I may not recognize you even if I know you until you get really close. Because I noticed some time ago, maybe a couple of years ago, I had a really serious eye infection from wearing contact lenses and falling asleep. And I wasn't able to wear contact lenses for 2 months or something like that. And I never actually went back to wearing contact lenses. You guys all saw me start to wear glasses. And I did get contact lenses to wear on the stage, but everything about my singing was worse with these contact lenses on, and I wasn't any better at following the conductor. So that now I don't wear them. And the reason is I'm just as good at seeing movement without being able to see so much detail. But it's because of this thing that Garcia is talking about. When I don't have the ability to read anything that's far away, I'm not going to be less likely to be in that mental mode, the attitude of reading. And it's easier to get into a performing attitude. So yeah, that's a great little bit of advice here. So, question: what is the use of transposition to singers? This is a great answer. To spare the most delicate and precious qualities of their voices, the velvetiness, velvetiness, and the freshness. I don't know, with these adjectives, it's the time period. They're so, I don't know, so thesaurusistic, thesaurial, very thesaurial. He says that transposition was invented for singers. I didn't know that. I figured they invented it for the orchestra and stuff. These transposing instruments. But that's and would be disfigured if a piece should not be fitted for transposition and would be disfigured by alterations. It would be better not to sing it than risk forcing the voice. So, I mean, yeah, the violent efforts required by a single air might be and have been enough to ruin a career. Maybe for a soprano, but I doubt it. This is exaggeration, and so this is so exaggerated, and we have now in universities everywhere students who are told they can't sing a particular song that they like because X, Y, or Z reason makes it too dangerous for them to sing that piece. And it's complete bullshit. Just absolute bullshit. When are you going to be getting good at that music if you're not going to be practicing it? When is that happening? This policy of telling students, you can't sing this because it's dangerous, etc., etc. If it's dangerous for me to sing something, and I'm at a university where the teaching staff is supposed to be there to help me work on singing safely, then obviously I'm in the wrong place because not one of them has even the first clue about where I would start. What is step one? So right now, the biggest thing I can sing is a Schubert song. Okay, what is step one for being able to sing Zygmunt someday? Even if I never get to the last step, okay, what is step one? And I mean, for crying out loud, we live in a day and age when now we have one of the established Helden tenors singing everything in neutral. If he can do that, so if Klaus Florian Vogt can sing Lohengrin, then any university student can sing any freaking aria that they want. What's going to hurt you is not singing one aria and this aria was from Tosca, and Tosca is for big sopranos, so now you're ruining your voice for your whole life by singing Visidarte or something. What's going to kill you is rehearsals. If you're not vocally resilient, you're not gonna find out because you sang the wrong aria. You're gonna find out because you took the wrong contract, and that might not even be the actual repertoire. If you're playing in small houses, for instance, the chances are your orchestras are gonna be playing really loud all the time with not a lot of opportunities to do anything except for your loudest singing, because anything else they're not going to hear. If you want to sing quiet, you got to go to a top opera house with a top orchestra who can play quietly. There's this weird paradox. The bigger the orchestra is, the quieter it can play. And the smaller it is, the louder it's going to be. And that's a weird thing, but it's the way it is. And what's going to kill you is rehearsal. It's going to be doing a piece in a situation where you can't just stop. But if you're a student and you've read Garcia, he's already told you how to keep yourself safe. You stop. If you're singing and you start to feel a tickle, you stop. The universities don't help this because if you want to practice, you have to book a practice room these days, usually. Right now, so let's say you book your practice room for half an hour and you go in and you sing for 3 minutes. And the thing to do is stop. It's time to stop because you've started to irritate things. And especially, let's say the first 2 minutes was good. And then you screwed up and you started to get some inflammation or whatever. The thing to do is stop. I don't know about stopping for hours, but at least you stop for 20 minutes. You can go back to work. And you're probably going to be fine. But if you're, fighting to have these half-hour blocks and if your whole practice situation is designed for instrumentalists, then you're not in a good situation. And unfortunately, that's university these days. Okay, Tiber's going to come through with more. We're going to have to make you producer, Tiber. So some examples of singers who play. Yeah. I imagine there's no reason why you can't. There's no reason why you wouldn't be able to sing and play. I imagine even, if you're like, there might be a way to use the keys for support, because a lot of times people lean on something and actually use it for their support. You might notice it's easier to give a recital if you stand near the piano and you can lean on the piano and support yourself a bit. And you'll see singers use it. It's not like they'll stick to the piano the whole time, but there'll be like one spot in the phrase that would have required a whole lot more energy than if you just put one hand on the piano and support your rib cage with that for a second. Yeah. So what precautions should a singer take against... but just going back to this, I would not put much credence in the idea that it's like a single air, a single aria is going to ruin the voice. I think this is exaggeration that is all about... It's not that Garcia is completely full of shit. He's not. He made some really, really, really important statements in vocal pedagogy. And he's a really important, influential guy with a lot of really positive contributions. But I think we have to remember also, he's trying to be successful in this business. The business of being a famous teacher. And this kind of thing to me seems like it's about maximizing his power more than it is about actually giving the best information possible. Because if he tells you like, oh, it's no big deal, don't worry, you might get the idea like, well then, I guess I don't really need weekly lessons with you. I guess I could come and see you a few times. And if I saw you a few times, I would probably know most of the things that you have to teach me, and I wouldn't really need you anymore. And we can't have that. So instead, we're going to have this artificial danger. And the artificial danger is based on real danger. So it's an exaggerated danger. So that's kind of clever. But I don't really agree with these methods. So what precautions should a singer take against climatic influences? To take precautions against climactic influences, then I don't know, sing some Philip Glass. Then you never have to worry about any climax, dramatic or otherwise. So he should avoid sudden changes of temperature. Never sing in the open air, and well, that's interesting. And when passing from a warm to a cold temperature, especially after singing, he should protect his mouth and breathe through the nose. In a word, if he desire to attain fame and secure wealth, every one of his acts must tend to promote the healthy duration of his organ. Chi dura vince. This is kind of like Garcia kind of being a fortune cookie. If he desire to attain fame and secure wealth, every one of his acts must tend to promote the healthy duration of his organs. So we have the two options, you know. The two options are you can ruin your voice or you can attain fame and secure wealth. If you do what Garcia tells you. But some of us, I mean, never sing in the open air. We just have to. But I did notice some of this doing some Christmas concerts in some parts of Europe. They don't heat the churches. There's no heat. So if you're talking about like Christmas Mass, you're probably gonna be wearing more clothing inside the church than on your way there. Like you're probably, because it's colder like inside than it is outside. And it is a little bit difficult to sing with cold air. And as far as I know, there's actually an effect on the functioning of your voice itself when the air is really cold. But by the time you're exhaling the air, it's not going to be so cold. But yeah, there's an acoustic effect, as far as I know, that's related to the temperature of the air. And so, but he recommends breathing through the nose, and I can say that it's also exaggerated these days. You know, people are like taping their mouth shut to sleep and stuff. But if you're on stage and you have a habit of breathing through your nose whenever you can, so I'm not saying breathe through your nose before you start a phrase. If you're gonna need a really big open jaw and mouth for your phrase, and it was open at the end of your last phrase, and you're gonna want your nasal passages closed, you can want the velum sealed during the phrase, it doesn't necessarily make sense to open your velum, arrange yourself so you can breathe through your nose. Now take the time to open right back up to the same place, maybe the same vowel, maybe the same pitch that you just finished on, and then start your phrase. That doesn't make sense. And you actually benefit by breathing through your mouth in that circumstance. But if you're not singing another phrase in the next 10 breaths, or even next 3 breaths, and you take those breaths through your nose, however much dust, however much dryness, or like climate stress, like the climatic stress that he was talking about, climatic influences, those will all be less because you're breathing through your nose. Less dust, less problems with the air being warmed and dried by all the lights on stage and stuff. So why not? Why not pick that low-hanging fruit, and not worry about that little bit of extra irritation you might get from breathing through your mouth constantly. Also, I think it helps your breath, but I'm not sure. Anyway. So, and also protecting your mouth, so wear a scarf, wear a mask. I guess Garcia was not anti-mask. We could have a debate about that 2 years ago. And food and clothing. Not as much of a big deal for us these days. It seems like weird that they mention it. But in Garcia's time, a lot of people were not so, warmly dressed. So let me see if we got some. Yeah, to bear, there's cooling in the theaters, but on the actual stage, under the lights, you can have pretty big variation in temperature. That's, even just being a couple steps over from here, then you step over there, and it's different air that you're breathing. And for some people, it's the change that's really irritating. It's the changes in temperature. I don't have too much problem, but I have a little, and just remembering to breathe through my nose is generally enough to help that. The dust is a lot backstage. The curtains and set pieces and stuff, especially in the smaller theaters. Probably in Berlin, at the, Staatsoper or whatever, it's not as dusty. They're taking care, but even with all that, it's going to be pretty dusty on the stage in the end. Yeah, and I think the air conditioning also really significantly dehumidifies the air, so it's quite dry. I did try sleeping with a dehumidifier, and it helped. It was a little bit irritating at first, and then as I got accustomed to sleeping with the dehumidifier, I wasn't getting the symptoms from the dryness at night, but I also wasn't bothered by suddenly dry air on stage. So that was, I don't know. I don't have any basis for saying that works other than I tried it. Could be placebo. The other thing to mention about what Garcia is saying is that not all vocal coordinations are equally unreliable, or rather, they're not all equally affected by something like inflammation. A soprano might find it almost impossible to perform if the soprano has inflammation. But for instance, the biggest high Bs, not high Cs, but high Bs at least, that I've sung in my life, I was sick and having trouble phonating in speech. So super inflamed. And there's a vocal inflammation test that you can do. You can look that up on YouTube. There's a voice doctor that does. He has you sing the birthday song, happy birthday, and you do a few exercises all with really light falsetto. And with this series of tests, you can get a really good read on how much inflammation you have. But so that was really high, really high inflammation. I was like, when I tried to do the inflammation test, like I wasn't able to start the phrase because my vocal folds were so inflamed. But the B4 that I was going for was fuller density and metallic. So I'm trying to do this with stiff and like engorged, inflamed vocal folds. So once I figured out how to get it to go, because the shapes were a little bit different and the way everything was behaving was a little bit different, but by the end of the show, it ended on a big B4 for me, basically. I figured out how to do that. It wasn't my best singing, I didn't have nice phrases or anything. It was just, go. But that B4 was significantly more powerful than what I can do when I'm healthy. Because it's like, as long as you were pushing hard enough, basically, like, it was going to be extremely loud. But also, when you're talking about vibrating the whole vocal fold, the body that's on top, so the mucosal layer that's on top, but then also, not that's the cover that's on top. Not just the cover, but the whole body. Now you're not so dependent on the mucous membrane being able to do its mucous membrane thing. If it's inflamed, it's just not as big of a deal because you don't need it to do anything particularly delicate. You don't need to use, shall we say, the thin edge of the vocal folds. So going back to the three tenors example, for instance, this lighter tenor, if you make him sick and you make his vocal folds inflamed, he's going to have a bigger hit on his performance than Müller will, or the other guy. It's like being the other guy. It's like being Carreras. Like, nobody knows who you are. But yeah, I would expect if he gets reflux or something, for instance, that's going to make his life miserable. And it's going to do it a lot worse than it would to Müller. Because of the different coordinations that they use. It doesn't mean one's better than the other, but that's what I've observed tends to be. That the more you stretch your vocal folds to sing, and then the more you rely on the neutral vocal mode, the more you also rely on your vocal folds being not inflamed. So that's really interesting. And then, okay. So I think we studied, we covered this section 15, and I guess we've slowed down now, and we're covering like one section per live stream. But I think that's just fine. So that was section 8, and then for section 9. We're going to be on the study of agility, which doesn't It doesn't interest me personally as much as what we've been studying. But, we're going to read the whole book. So that's what we said we're going to do, and that's what we're going to do. So thanks for joining me on Mr. Opera, to those of you watching the live stream, and then to those of you who are going to be watching later. I hope you enjoyed this little talk on Hints on Singing by Manuel Garcia. I'll give you a little preview. We got more videos coming up next time. We got Alanya in rehearsal here. Let's see, and we're gonna have Fabiano singing some interesting Cavaradossi. We got a few names, a few singers we're gonna look at. So I'll check in now, see if we get any more questions before I go, and if not, I'm gonna go have some dinner. No more questions, no more comments. So, all right. So I'll see you guys. Have a very good evening, and just remember,
Insieme concorde, mare ritrarca sei, il mio solo pensiero, il mio pensiero,